My name's Phillipa McCormack, and I'm a researcher in law at the University of Adelaide. I get to answer a very cool question, which is, will politicians change the country's trade system to prevent climate change? I particularly love this question because we often think, what are we going to do as citizens of Australia, as people who live in Australia, to make our government do better on climate change? But this question comes at it from a slightly different perspective. Like, what are other countries doing that we trade with that might make us do better as well? And that's a pretty cool way to think about this problem, because in reality, we're going to fix the problem. We're all going to have to do it together. So this is, in fact, a very big year for trade rules that focus on climate change. So in 2023, the European Union, it's a big group of countries in Europe that make lots of decisions together, makes them stronger, difficult to ignore. They introduced a carbon border adjustment scheme, sometimes called a CBAM. The European Union was worried that as it starts to make really strong rules to stop industries from emitting lots of greenhouse gases by making it really expensive to emit those greenhouse gases, instead of just cleaning up their activities and being really great at addressing climate change, the rules might mean that those dirty industries just move away from Europe and they start doing their dirty things in other places where the rules aren't as strong. We call this carbon leakage. The emissions are leaking away from the strong rules to the weak rules. Most of the countries that trade with Europe don't have strict rules or high costs for industries that produce lots of carbon emissions. So the European Union was also really worried that it would be unfair for corporations, industries that stay in Europe to produce goods like cars and food, wind turbines, stuff we really need, because they'd be at a disadvantage compared to everybody else, having to pay for the carbon costs of their product while everybody else isn't. So the CBAM's purpose is to prevent the risk of carbon leakage by making sure that anyone who wants to trade into Europe, and lots of countries want to trade with Europe, is big, they buy lots of stuff, they have to pay the difference between the cost of emitting in the country that they make the thing and the cost that they would have had to pay if they'd made that thing in Europe. So it puts everyone, at least in theory, the starting point is that everyone who's buying and selling into Europe has to pay the same actual climate costs of their products that European companies are having to pay. For Australia, what that means is that there's pressure actually to make some strong rules about paying for carbon emissions here in Australia, because if industries pay for it here, then the money goes to the Australian government instead of having to pay that difference to Europe, because then the European Union gets the money from that industry instead of Australia. So it's not like a direct pressure. It's not going to change the whole world right immediately. But what it shows us is that there's a commitment out there actually by quite a few governments, and I think it's going to get more and more and more, to not just do something about climate change, but to make sure that as they do something, they're dragging other people along with them. And Australia might not change the rules straight away, but I reckon that the trade system is going to be one of the things that really starts to help Australia be brave and take action on climate change and actually start to get this problem solved.